Head out to Tucson, Arizona, and you notice a few things. It's rather hot, it's rather dry, and much of the landscape is decidedly hard and flat. It's not ideal for farming, and perhaps not everyone's cup of tea as a tourism destination, but if you're looking to set up America's national air power reservoir, it's a pretty niche job. Arguably one of the most important strategic military locations in the world, you have absolutely come to the right place. Tucson is home to the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, and by extension, the Boneyard, otherwise known as the 309th Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group, or AMARG. Although rarely mentioned in textbooks, the 309th AMARG started out life as a simple depository for excess Department of Defense and Coast Guard aircraft, only to become a key component in not only virtually every major US military operation since World War II, but also in many major foreign military operations as well. From the fall of the Berlin Wall to the Vietnam War, the Boneyard was largely unseen and barely mentioned, but it acted as the linchpin that held these operations together. Imagine this, you're at your favorite coffee shop, sipping on some delicious coffee, doing a little bit of work on your laptop. Life is good, but did you know that using public Wi-Fi can be risky? Hackers could be lurking, waiting to steal your sensitive information. But don't worry, I've got the perfect solution to keep your internet activity safe, and that is Surfshark. Surfshark is a VPN that masks your online activities, keeping all of your important stuff private and secure. It's like having a superpower that protects you from prying eyes. It's super easy to use. Just open the app, pick a server, and you are connected. Instant protection. And it's not just about security. Surfshark lets you virtually travel the world with a tap of your finger. Want to watch a show that's only available in another country? No problem. With Surfshark, you can access content from back home even when you're traveling. No more geo-blocks messing up your plans. And the best part, it won't break the bank. One subscription covers all of your devices. So whether you're on your phone, tablet, or laptop, Surfshark have you covered. So stay safe on public Wi-Fi, get past those annoying geo-blocks, and secure online life with Surfshark. Head to the link in the description below or go to surfshark.deals/mega and use the promo code MEGA for 4 months extra. Protect your privacy and enjoy the internet without limits thanks to Surfshark. And now back to today's episode. Hearing the term Boneyard perhaps conjures up images of the Lion King's infamous elephant graveyard, but rest assured, AMARG is anything but a lifeless, child-traumatizing stretch of land where hulking beasts head off to die. On the contrary, the Boneyard is far more about keeping military hardware alive and ready for use, though it does also serve as the final resting place for obsolete vehicles. The facility, just a 20-minute drive from Tucson, is a remarkably efficient and incredibly well-organized arm of Air Force Material Command, tasked with not only storing aircraft in various stages of readiness, but likewise expected to transfer stored hardware back into service at very short notice. In addition to being a military hardware storage depot, the Boneyard is also instrumental in providing hundreds of millions in parts annually to both American and Allied fleets. To put this all in a nutshell, the Boneyard is the far less glorified logistics machine that keeps the US military running, as important, if not more important, than the widely publicized military operations themselves. Now, this probably isn't going to come as a shock, but the US has military hardware in excess. It's important to understand, though, that there is a big difference between having enormous fleets of cutting-edge hardware and being able to store, organize, and deploy that hardware effectively. After all, having expensive aircraft doesn't do much good if it takes a month to get that armada functional and in the air. It also doesn't do much good if what you need is a hammer and all you have in your toolbox is a screwdriver, which is to say, contrary to popular belief, military hardware is anything but a one-size-fits-all equation. Individual military hardware is designed with very specific use in mind, which is why military success is often defined by flexibility and adaptability rather than by who has the most guns. So the real question is, well, where do you keep your fleets? How much do you spend keeping them in a ready state? And most importantly, what do you do if the current wartime situation requires vehicles other than those you have standing by? All of which is why the US military keeps the Boneyard running like a well-oiled machine. The 11 square kilometer facility has around 3,200 aircraft in various states of readiness, most being capable of being shipped out in a matter of days or sometimes even hours, depending on necessity, priority, and which department of the US is calling for it. Essential parts are available with equal levels of efficiency. efficiency, and should a part be prioritized, it may be stripped, prepared, and shipped in as little as 3 days. Beyond the ready-to-go planes are an additional 6,300 engines for various other airborne vehicles. These parts are less likely to be needed at short notice, but are still available should an unexpected situation call for them. Now look, with all of this being said, the Boneyard wasn't always the cutting-edge facility that it is today. It's taken decades for what was essentially a dumping ground of unneeded hardware to evolve into the military hardware backbone of the US. First of all, why put a military facility of enormous importance in the absolute middle of the scorching desert? Well, it turns out that scorching weather is exactly what is needed for sedentary military hardware, given that the biggest challenge of storing armored vehicles is naturally occurring corrosion and rust. The only reliable answer to rust is, as anyone that lives in a tropical climate will tell you, to move to a drier climate. This makes the Arizona desert amongst the driest regions in the US a really excellent location. Of course, there is far more to it than simply dumping multi-million-dollar hardware in the desert and leaving it to bake in the sun. A great deal of specialized effort goes into preparing an aircraft that sits for months or even years, enduring temperatures that exceed 101 Fahrenheit or 38 Celsius. And a little bit more on that later. Now, the other benefit of the Tucson desert is its naturally hard and inflexible landscape. In other circumstances, a great deal of time, effort, and money would have gone into paving the 11 square kilometer area. But in Tucson, the ground is already baked into a near cement-like state, allowing for the towing and maneuvering of even the heaviest vehicles without risk of wheels sinking into the earth. There are, on the other hand, more than a few drawbacks to engaging in hard manual labor in the desert, as the 700 stationed at the Boneyard and over 10,000 at the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base will attest to. Dehydration is such a concern that a buddy system has been implemented whereby engineers involved in particularly stressful work are encouraged to look out for one another. If your buddy complains of stomach cramps, appears pale, or looks exhausted, it's time to step in and insist that they take a rehydration break, else risk landing up in the infirmary receiving emergency fluids. A senior airman, Joshua A. McKay, eloquently put it, "Once you feel thirsty in this heat, you are already dehydrated. You should be drinking water regardless of if you feel thirsty or not." Despite all the drawbacks, Tucson was still the perfect storage location of military aircraft. In 1945, following World War II, a decision was made by San Antonio Air Technical Service Command to store unneeded Boeing B-29 Superfortresses and Douglas C-47 Skytrain aircraft in the Arizona desert. This was the first step that eventually turned the Boneyard into that cutting-edge, globe-spanning Air Force hub that it is today. At the time San Antonio Air Technical Service Command decided to store the unneeded aircraft at the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, there wasn't much available in the way of specialized storage facilities. The idea of recycling or reprocessing military vehicles wasn't yet being properly explored, and following World War II, unneeded military hardware was often simply stashed away or dumped into a landfill. Thus, the newly founded 4105th Army Air Force Base Unit, a dedicated storage facility, was more of a makeshift necessity than anything really specialized. Following their establishment, a number of rapid changes occurred in the US military, the most prominent of which came in 1947. The United States Air Force was permanently separated from the United States Armed Forces, thereby creating an entirely independent entity. Needless to say, the much broader and far better funded USAF set about expanding its capabilities, and as the research and new production of aircraft ramped up, so too did the need for dedicated storage and maintenance. Now, the Boneyard underwent a frankly comical number of name and designation changes over the decades that followed, and we're not going to cover all of it, it would be really dull. The nutshell version is that the big development came in 1965, when the facility was renamed to the Military Aircraft Storage Disposition Center and tasked with processing aircraft for all of the United States Armed Forces, not just the Air Force. The US Navy had previously operated the dedicated Naval Air Station Litchfield Park on behalf of the Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard, but these facilities were folded into the rapidly expanding depot at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Over 500 aircraft were transported across Arizona, and the Naval Air Station shut down permanently in 1968. The Boneyard went through various additional stages of evolution over the years, adapting to the needs of the military as they arose, until finally in 2007 the Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Center was combined with the 309th Maintenance Wing, effectively creating a single, centralized facility that dealt with the storage and maintenance of aircraft on behalf of all arms of the US government, as well as extending those services to allied nations. US departments that rely on this facility today include the National Museum of the US Air Force, NASA, the Department of Agriculture, the National Science Foundation, and even the Smithsonian Institute. And side note here, the exterior Smithsonian scenes in Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen were actually shot at the Boneyard fun fact. As it stands today, Amag is widely recognized as amongst the most strategically important military facilities in the world. Not only does this single location keep a huge percentage of the world's aircraft operational, it's also home to some of the most talented military engineers alive. According to the commander of the Boneyard, Colonel Robert S. Leopard Jr., quoting here, "The experience of our workforce is beyond that of almost any other maintenance group commanders in the entire Air Force. In the active duty force, most maintainers work on, at most, 2 aircraft. But my crews work on 9 different airplanes in a day and take parts off 6 or 7 different kinds of aircraft. Most of my people have 20 to 40 years of experience in aircraft maintenance. Most maintenance group commanders would kill for 5 years average experience." That being said, just what exactly goes into storing and maintaining multi-million-dollar aircraft? Well, let's look at that now, shall we? Aircraft arriving at the Boneyard are put into storage categories depending on the broader needs of the military. The categories are Type 1000, long-term storage, Type 2000, parts reclamation, Type 3000, flying hold, and Type 4000, in excess of DoD needs. Now, regardless of the type of storage, it is no small task preparing an aircraft for hibernation. On average, it's going to take Boneyard engineers and mechanics 50 hours of manual labor before any hardware can reliably be put out into the sun. Helicopters take longer, given that special treatment must be provided for the rotary blades. Particularly big aircraft, such as the hulking B-52, may take up to 300 hours before they're greenlit for stashing. Upon arrival at the Boneyard, the hardware is accepted by a team at the receiving branch. Each item comes with documentation listing any maintenance received since original construction, ensuring that proper treatment is provided. Planes are washed, with special attention paid to anything that serves in a tropical climate. The fuel is flushed, corrosive chemicals are drained, and any explosive elements are removed, such as ejector seat components. Clocks and data plates are also removed, though this isn't for safety, but rather due to the Boneyard having an ongoing problem with memento hunters. Visitors often steal clocks and data plates due to an enthusiastic collector's market for these items in particular. This, of course, isn't to say that security at the Boneyard is lackluster. There's a quick divergence. Security at the facility has actually been stepped up in recent years due to a dramatic increase in the value of F-14 Tomcat parts on the black market. F-14 parts are highly sought after by the Iranian Air Force. This following a sale by the US of 79 F-14s to Iran in the late 70s. Later, the Islamic Revolution turned relations between the two nations sour, and the US put a restriction on the sale of F-14 parts to Iran in hopes that the sold fleet would remain grounded. As such, countless shady arms dealers have sprung up ready to pay a small fortune for anything that will help keep Iran's aging F-14s operational. Steps have since been taken to counter the problem, including the destruction of surplus F-14s at the Boneyard, as well as a tightening of security across the board. Alright, so let's get back to the receiving branch. After aircraft are processed, they're put into the specific category of specialized storage. Type 1000 storage means that the aircraft is maintained in good condition, given that it will probably fly again at some point. The parts in Type 1000 storage are typically available for salvage, though only in the case of priority and only if strict permissions are granted. About 10% of aircraft at the Boneyard are in inviolate 1000 storage, and maintaining them is a priority. All Type 1000 aircraft can be rapidly resurrected back into service, though the resurrection won't be as fast as Type 3000 storage. Type 2000 aircraft are similarly stored to Type 1000, but with hardware in this category expressly greenlit for part reclamation. Either way, be an aircraft destined for 1000 or 2000 storage, the vehicle will undergo a spray lat treatment before being put out into the scorching desert sun. Spray lat refers to the process of applying a $550 per 5-gallon or 19-liter latex that's applied as a cocoon to the exterior of the aircraft. An interior black layer and exterior white layer are used. All gaps, holes, and breaches are carefully covered, preventing the creep of moisture, sand, or dirt. Special attention is paid to vulnerable exterior moving parts, as well as providing protection from moisture. The latex layers also ensure that no matter how hot it gets in the interior of the aircraft, it never exceeds 15 degrees of ambient temperature. Type 3000 storage is for aircraft that are likely to be called back into duty in the near future. It's these vehicles that occupy much of the core activity at the Boneyard, given that 24-hour care must be provided to avoid the complex machinery slipping into a state of stagnation. The engines are run every 30 days, internal fluids are serviced regularly, and the aircraft are even manually towed for short distances to ensure that floating bearings remain lubricated. An aircraft in Type 3000 storage can be called back into active duty in a matter of days, or sometimes even hours, depending on circumstances. And lastly, Type 4000 storage is for aircraft that are not presently needed, are unlikely to be needed again in the future, and are otherwise considered entirely unnecessary. Type 4000 vehicles are stripped down, the engines are stored separately, and valuable parts are categorized standardized and made available to both local and allied fleets. Once all valuable parts and useful materials are harvested, whatever remains is sent to the scrapping department. And that indeed brings us to the scrapping department of the Boneyard, the final resting place of obsolete military hardware. The demil section, or demilitarization section, is tasked with the deconstruction of the remains of aircraft as much as possible, then cutting the hollow shell into more manageable pieces. Whatever can't be melted down and recycled is officially put to rest for good in the scrapyard. The 578th Disposal Squadron is first up in the lengthily scrapping process, tasked with removing hazardous materials such as asbestos, beryllium, anything radioactive, lead, and depleted uranium. Depleted uranium was used in the armor of the Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II, and in the armor of the C-130 Hercules, if you are curious about what that's used for. Following the removal of hazardous materials, a recently defunct unit, the Strategic Material Recovery and Reuse Program, previously oversaw the separation of potentially sellable metals like titanium for allied nations. Defense Logistics has since discontinued that service due to labor costs, and now any nation interested in the scrap is responsible for reclaiming it on their own time. It's worth noting that rather admirably, if at any stage of scrapping, Boneyard teams find anything interesting, such as unique nose art or any other notable features worth preserving, they contact the National Museum of the US Air Force before disposing of the vehicle entirely. The Boneyard has played a role in a frankly dizzying number of strategic military operations over the years, including the Berlin Airlift, the Korean War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Vietnam War, Operation Desert Storm, the Bosnian War, Operations Iraqi and Enduring Freedom, as well as the ongoing global war on terror. There is so much that it would require an unrealistically long video to list everything, so here's a really brief summary of some of the prominent operations that relied on the Boneyard in some form or another. In 1948, as the Cold War blossomed to occupy the chaos left by World War II, the Soviet Union blocked all road, rail, and canal traffic in and out of Western-controlled Berlin. In response, the strategic Berlin Airlift was launched, prompting Great Britain and America to airdrop essential supplies to stranded civilians. Some 250,000 flights were made, many of them in C-47 cargo planes stored at the Boneyard. With the help of these rapidly deployed planes, the target amount of supplies delivered was often doubled, ultimately putting an end to what could have otherwise been a humanitarian disaster. In the 1950s, the Boneyard played a pivotal role in several major operations as well, primarily in support of the Korean War. Several hundred B-29 bombers stored after World War II were promptly reconditioned and redeployed for missions in North Korea. In that same period, a separate 80 B-29s were provided to the United Kingdom to provide the country with long-range attack capabilities prior to the development and deployment of the country's own English electric Canberra. In the 70s, following the Vietnam War, the Boneyard reached its peak of storage capability, landing up as the designated depot for many of the aircraft recalled from duty. At that time, a total of 6,080 aircraft were overseen by a comparatively small crew working in the Boneyard. Towards the end of the 70s, a landmark program kicked off at the Boneyard, still operational to this day. It involved a number of aircraft being pulled from storage and experimentally converted into unmanned drones. And yes, drones have existed since the late 1970s. To date, over 1,000 aircraft at the Boneyard, including F-102 Delta Daggers, F-100 Super Sabres, F-106 Delta Darts, F-4 Phantom IIs, and F-16 Fighting Falcons, have made the conversion to unmanned drone status via specialized Boneyard engineers. The 80s saw the Boneyard, the Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Center at that time, take on the additional task of dismantling and repurposing intercontinental ballistic missiles to instead be used in the launching of satellites. Following this, in the 90s, the facility played a key role in coordinating the US in compliance with the groundbreaking Measures for the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or START 1. The bilateral agreement signed by the US and Russia saw both nations agree to vastly reduce the quantity of offensive military items held by each nation. The Boneyard oversaw the dismantling of 365 Boeing B-52 Stratofortress bombers, all under the careful watch of Russia via satellites and via first-person inspections. In 2012, the Boneyard ramped up to support the military operations in Iraq. This required the repurposing of 10,000 parts in support of various fleets, most prominently F-15s, B-1Bs, F-16s, C-5s, and C-135s. The entire operation had a value of around $472 million. It was reported in 2023 that in providing support for the conflict in Ukraine, that the facility reclaimed and processed around 7,000 parts, the value of which exceeded $250 million. The facility itself is valued at around $34 billion today, making it among the most valuable military strategic locations in the world. No doubt, the Boneyard will continue to support Ukraine, no matter when or how the war finally comes to a conclusion.